Welcome. Scott here. Here is a quick boss guide for the upcoming LUFENIA Plus event, Dimensions End Transcendence Tier 9. Before I proceed further, here is a quick overview on how Transcendence works. For any Transcendence stages, your party will get boosted stats if you bring a burst unit for the fight. To access Dimensions End Transcendence, you need to clear up to Tier 5 of Dimensions End Entropy. There are 3 stages that you need to clear for the fight. There are 2 crucibles that you need to clear first before you can access the main gate. The main gate will require you to bring only the characters that you have used for the crucibles. You can't use any of the characters locked to the tier for other tiers unless you unlock them. Firstly, let's break down the requirements of the crucibles. All LUFENIA orbs are fatal and they are mechanics that you should watch out for this Transcendence fight. Do take note that LUFENIA auras for crucibles are the standard versions and they are not the restrictive ones that you face in the plus versions. For the left crucible or crucible 1, you will be fighting 2 Sahagin Shaman. They have 20 million HP each. The turn requirements are 50 and you need to bring a white crystal unit. The orb requires you to inflict 2 debuffs per turn. You get additional upticks if the boss is debuffed with 4 or more debuffs. For the right crucible or crucible 2, you will be fighting 2 wild shearers. They have 20 million HP each. The turn requirement is 50 and you need to bring a green crystal unit. The orb requires you to have someone with a stacking debuff of level 5 and above or inflict a gold frame debuff. Upon clearing both crucibles, you will be able to access the main reckoning stage or the middle gate. You will be fighting a new enemy type, Anger Hawk. These beasts have a mammoth-sized HP of 60 million each. The turn count for the fight is 100 and the HP requirements is 5000. To uptick the orb, you need to constantly inflict a total of 4 debuff or ensure a gold frame debuff is active at the end of the boss turns. Other than downtick the orb whenever the boss acts, they will also downtick orb by 3 per buff they gain. Before I continue further, here is a small disclaimer clause for the video. The guide is written based on the time that the stage was released for the Japanese version. Please do note that it is possible that the boss fight mechanics might differ when the actual event is released in global. Let's cover on the mechanics of the first crucible. You need to bring a white crystal unit for the stage and units that can inflict debuff using their abilities. There is a wide cast of units that inflict debuffs. You will get additional uptick on the orb when the boss acts while they are inflicted with 4 or more debuffs. Examples of units that can reliably uptick the orb are Vincent, Kepka, the Emperor, X-Det, Laguna, Seymour, Sarah, Chaos, and Rome. The Crucible is designed to the strengths of featured BT unit, Vincent. Firstly, let's cover the orb triggers. At the start of the fight, the orb will begin at the count of 10. It is a non-cancelable orb. The LUFENIA countdown ability is fatal. The orb will downtick by 1 per party action. If you inflict 2 total debuffs in 1 turn, you will freeze the orb. If you keep the orb, if the boss is inflicted with 4 or more debuffs at the end of its turn, you will uptick the orb by 2. At the first glance, the orb may seem to be a tough requirement to meet. But with the recent C90 awakenings and character reworks, there are a lot of units that finish off the fight before the boss become a threat to your party. The orb is tied 1 and you are bound to give the boss turns. Now, I will briefly go through the Sahagin mechanics. For this fight thankfully, there aren't any HP threshold trigger counters nor the annoying blessing buff that requires you to dispel. At the start of the fight, one of the Sahagin will use Supplication of Grace, which is AoE buff skill that will grant both Sahagin 5 buffs. They will alternate turns to use it throughout the fight. This will be an obstacle if you don't have the countermeasures against it. If the attack debuff is active, the Sahagin will use the plus variant of its water cannon and Sahagin jump. Beware of giving it too brave or it could surprise you with its impale or multi-skewer HP attack. The key attack to watch out for this fight is Erdgeist's power. Whether the Sahagin will unleash a Brave gain, AoE Brave plus HP attack. Try to target to kill them both at the same time, otherwise the surviving Sahagin will use Supplication of Grace. Now, let's cover the second Crucible. For this Crucible, you need to bring a green crystal unit. You will be fighting 2 wild Shearers. Let's talk about the Orb first. The Orb will appear at the start of the fight. The LUFENIA countdown ability is fatal. The Orb will downtick by 1 per party action and 2 per enemy action. You will freeze the Orb if your character has a 5-stack buff active and reduce the downtick to 1 per enemy action if the bears are inflicted with a gold frame debuff. For gold frame debuffs, you can use Laguna, Sephiroth, or Kaduch. Laguna only inflicts gold frame debuff on his BT. For 5-stack buffs, examples that fulfill the conditions are Sephiroth, Siren, Noctis, Chaos, Zack or 9. You can only uptick the Orb while summon or burst phase with a character who has a 5-stack buff effect. So technically this fight is a rush down Orb fight. Sephiroth is great for this with his rework and BT plus awakening. Other than the LUFENIA auras to watch out for, the bears will cleanse buffs and gain massive brave at the 79%, 59%, and 29% HP thresholds. If you don't break them, they will unleash Spear Shot Plus, which is a single brave plus HP with buff dispel while ignoring HP and brave damage nullification effects. In other words, it is an instant KO attack unless the character has an innate last stand passive. If you break it, it will use Spear Shot instead. Spear Shot will inflict Puncture Wound if it breaks the target. The bears can inflict Intimidate, a 100% defense down debuff, with its penetrating punch. It can also use Brio Shot where it is a guaranteed hit, AoE Brave plus HP attack where it can inflict Poison Wound which has HP poison effects. The bears are immune to its own wound type debuffs. To handle the bear's brave gain, you can make use of Gravity or Instant Break abilities. Sephiroth is great for this. Keep in mind of the thresholds when you are considering reapplying your debuffs. Try to kill both of them at the same time where possible, as the surviving one will buff itself when its partner is dead. With the 2 Crucibles out of the way, let's focus on the main Reckoning stage. You will be restricted to use 6 of the units that you used for the earlier Crucible stages. Here is a quick overview of the fight. You will be fighting the 2 Angerhawk beasts which has a mammoth amount of HP. Compared to last 2 Transcendence fights, this is going to be a difficult tier if you don't have optimum units for the fight. On the screen, you can see a timeline that illustrates the thresholds that you need to watch for. I will cover them in the later slides. First of all, let's cover the LUFENIA Plus Orb. The Orb starts off with 30 count and it will downtick by 1 per enemy action. To uptick the Orb, you need to fulfill either one of the following conditions. 1. For the first condition, you need to inflict 4 or more total debuffs in action. Any units that can apply 2 AoE debuffs will fulfill this Orb easily. You can consider the following units: Vincent, Kefka, Emperor, X-Death, Laguna, Seymour, Sarah, Rome, Titus, Chaos, Lily-Set, or Vanille. You can make single debuffers fulfill the Orb on AoE skill with Laguna RF Sphere. Example of units that can benefit from this sphere setup is Kaduch, Raijin and Quistis. 2. For the second condition, you need to maintain a gold frame debuff at the end of the boss turn. Units that can inflict gold frame debuffs are Laguna, Sephiroth, and Kaduch. The premium units for this fight are Glove, Sephiroth, Vincent, Purim and Rome. The boss has lots of HP attacks, thus bringing a damage mitigator is important here. They are Snow, Glove, Zack, Purim, and Beatrix. Glove and Purim works wonders here. Glove will hit very hard on his counters and Purim can ensure your party HP is maintained constantly at a safety margin. She can also uptick the Orb if her confusion procs on both bosses. Before I continue, I need to emphasize on one of the boss key mechanics. The boss will enter into its recovered stance at the following HP thresholds: 89%, 59%, 49%, 29%, 19%, and 9%. When it reaches the threshold, it will cleanse all debuffs and buff itself with 5 buffs. As the boss will downtick the orb by 3 per buff gain, this action will downtick the orb by 15. So, it is important to ensure that the orb is at least 16 when you trigger the condition. This mechanic will be shut down hard if you have Vincent's BT aura active or a unit that negates buff gains like Yuffie or Era. Let's start off the mechanics proper. I will be covering the thresholds trigger in this slide. Like other LUFENIA Plus fights, the boss will gain stats boost at the following HP thresholds: start of the fight and 49% HP thresholds. The maximum brave damage reduction is 50% and the maximum brave gain reduction is 70%. At the LUFENIA thresholds trigger, the boss will also raise its defense along with max brave cap. I have already covered the recovered stance in the earlier slide. I will repeat this again because it will be a game over if you don't pay attention to it carefully. At the 6 thresholds mentioned, the boss will cleanse all debuffs and gains 5 buffs. For every buff gain, the orb will downtick by 3. So, it is a guaranteed downtick of 15 when the boss triggers this. Make sure that orb count is at least 16 when you trigger this. If you trigger the threshold while in summon or burst phase, the orb don't downticks. So you can plan the summon or burst phase for this purpose. The boss can also gain massive 1 million HP shields at the following HP thresholds: 89%, 69%, 49%, 29%, and lastly 9%. When the shield is activated, the boss will emit a purple aura where it will boost its initial brave and gains a 50% HP damage resistance. Try to stagger the trigger if you bringing Vincent, as he relies on brave hits for his damage. So, you can damage one foe while the splash damage will slowly deplete the shield. The boss will also activate another aura called Grow Nimble. When it is activated, it will boost the boss turn rate and speed. The activation will start from the 89% HP threshold. The boss seems to reactivate this aura at other thresholds or after a certain number of turns. In this slide, you will see the entire arsenal of attacks that you need to watch out for. Let's start off with the recast ability. Both bosses will start off the fight with a full recast gauge. Depending on the breaks that the boss lands, the recast gauge will charge to max in every 3 to 4 boss turns. The recast ability, Ice Blow, is a guaranteed, brave gain AoE brave plus HP attack. Upon executing it, the boss will gains a blue aura where it will gain an additional 50% defense boost along with 50% resistance to all weapons types. You can bypass the resistance with Enchant Imperil or Brave gains or units dealing weakness damage. It is lucky that the resistance will wears off after 5 field turns. On the right side of the slide, I have listed down the other boss key attacks that you need to watch out for. You can see that the boss relies on initial brave gains for its core attack. Nerfing the initial brave with initial brave down debuffs or reducing its attack with attack down debuffs will help a lot to ensure that the boss damage output will be significantly reduced. We have come to the last slide of the guide. Overall, this fight isn't a cakewalk compared to the previous Transcendence tiers. This is probably the first tier where you may find ultimate weapon necessary to complete the fight depending on your team comp. After all, we are talking about 2 bosses with 60 million HP each. Watch out for the relaxed stance HP thresholds trigger where the boss will cleanse the debuffs and gains 5 buffs for that 15 orb downtick mechanic. Have your debuffers to constant apply 4 total debuffs so you can maintain the orb at a safety margin. You can expand the cast of orb fulfilling units by equipping a Laguna RF sphere on a debuffer with E slot to help for the cause. I have listed down the units that you can consider for the fight. If you use a unit in the previous tier, they can be useful for this tier as a call ability. For example, Laguna, Sephiroth, and Paris are good call options for the fight. As the boss have a mammoth chunk of HP to chip, don't expect the fight to end in an instant. You will still want to reserve some units for the future tiers. Expect the fight to last beyond 20 minutes in general. Bring your damage boosters, counter units, or units that support damage with off-turn damage for the fight. Glove is a premium unit for this fight as his counters can easily deal 500k per counters and 700k if he dodges the physical attacks. Constantly upkeep damage mitigation throughout the fight. Debuffs that nerfs the boss initial brave or attack will help to ensure that the boss won't do any harm to your party. Please do keep in mind that the HP requirements is 5000 only. With this, I have come to the end of the guide. Hopefully, this will help you. If you like the video, please give it a like. If you are looking forward to future content like this, please subscribe to my channel for future related content. Good luck and bye.